Alright, so today I'm going to talk a little bit about the Elizabethan world picture, the great chain of being, and how that relates to Adam and Eve in Milton's Paradise Lost. So, the resources I'll be drawing from for this video are, of course, Paradise Lost. I've also got a preface to Paradise Lost by C.S. Lewis. And then I have my guide here, The Elizabethan World Picture by E.M.W. Tilliard, which I have heard is standard reading for those studying English, especially in the Elizabethan Tudor era. So I was glad to pick this up on thrift books. So yeah, one of the things that you'll realize, or that most modern readers perhaps will notice when they read through Paradise Lost for the first time, is the relationship between Adam and Eve. On multiple occasions in the book, which we'll get into for examples, Milton describes Adam as being like the head or above Eve in some sense in relation to God. And with our modern feminist notions, that might seem a bit off-putting or strange to a modern reader. But in fact, in the Elizabethan world, which Milton was very much a part of, being born just after it technically ended, of course, so there's no real cultural division of when the Elizabethan period ended for sure. I mean, of course, the reign of Elizabeth or what have you, but the cultural era does not end with the death of Elizabeth, right? The cultural momentum carries on, and Milton was very much part of that cultural milieu of the time. So we'll get a little bit more into the Elizabethan world picture. I'm going to go over the entire book, actually give a summary, and then I'll finish with the chain of being, which will segue us into Milton, Adam and Eve, and yeah, that hierarchical nature. So, got my trusty notes here. Yeah, so Elizabethan period, just for those of you who aren't familiar, 1558 to 1603, Milton being born in 1608, so right, like I was saying, just after the end. Fun little fact, Milton born in London on Bread Street. Now, I don't know, that's kind of a weird name for a street, but very European, I guess. If I was to guess where Bread Street was in the world, London would probably be my first guess, so kind of stereotypical, perhaps. Anyways, again, I also wanted to note that I'm not covering the entirety of this topic in the Bible or in a general sense. I don't want to talk about male-female dynamics in the broad sense. Of course, it's a huge topic. I want to zone in on the Elizabethan view of the great chain of being, hierarchy between men and women, especially in Paradise Lost. So my treatment of this topic will be specific and not broad in general. So if you're looking for hot takes on more general topics, you're looking in the wrong place. We're just talking about Paradise Lost, which is the third of 3 videos that I promised to deliver on Paradise Lost. So yeah, this is the final installment, at least until I read it again, perhaps in a couple of years. So, where are we here? Yeah, summarizing Tilliard's book, The Elizabethan World Picture. So, one of the things that Tilliard points out is that people often think about Elizabethan period as relatively secular in comparison to other eras around that same general time, like compared to the Middle Ages and so on. However, he points out that while this may be true in if you squint a little bit, to be honest, there's so much cultural momentum behind the Middle Ages and just coming out of that there is very much so religiosity is still a major component of the collective mind or of Elizabethan period. So it's highly religious, and he points out that the religious schema or the way that they thought about the world is very much so a evolution almost, or a vestige of the highly ordered view of the universe that comes from the Middle Ages, the highly theological view from the Middle Ages. So one of the things that this entails is that God is upholding the world and its functioning via his law at all times, and if he were to stop doing this, there would be utter chaos. Chaos in a primordial sense, right? Like before the earth was created, in Genesis there was chaos, right? So that kind of chaos, if God does not uphold the universe. So one of the things that he points out is that the Elizabethans saw the world as highly ordered, And that order is important when we start talking about the chain of being, obviously, because it's very, very ordered. So the next thing, of course, that is important for the Elizabethans is the idea of sin, right? Certain things are allowed, certain things are not allowed, and when you transgress of this moral law that's laid out in the Bible, there are consequences. We are separated from God. We must atone for our sins, or repent, I should say, and Christ has atoned for the sins, but we must repent and accept his sacrifice. So this scheme of the fall of man through sin, Christ's atonement, our salvation at the end, and then end times, that whole scheme of that cosmology and where humans fit into that was very much a part of the Elizabethan consciousness for all classes. So in addition, man's fall and sin as the cause of all evil and suffering in the world, right, as opposed to God being perfectly good. So God creates goodness and order, and humans pervert the order through sin. So we'll talk a little bit more about the perversion of the divine or natural order when we get to the great chain of being as well. So, however, through glorification, which is becoming more like Christ, right, attaining virtue, contemplating creation, those are some of the ways we do that. People could rise above their imperfections and grow closer to God. That was also a very prominent viewpoint. The next thing that Tilliard points out is this idea or difference between macrocosm and microcosm, or more generally speaking, the planes of existence. So there's different levels or planes to existence, and then these planes have connections and similarities that are called correspondences, and those exist between the planes. So the planes are, generally speaking, the angelic or divine at the top, the universe or macrocosm below that. Below that is the commonwealth or body politic, which is like the society. And then below that there's man, which is also known as the microcosm. And then below that is the lower creation, so like the plants and the animals and the matter, right? So some examples of correspondences between those planes of existence would be something like storms in nature. So that we're talking about the universe macrocosm, right? There's like storms and natural disasters, and those are correspondent to man's passions, right? So in the sense that they're both turbulent, difficult to control, maybe they come out of nowhere, right? There's similarities there. Another example would be that reason must rule over man's passions, right? Just like a king rules over his unruly subjects, right? So the correspondence there is between the commonwealth or society, body politic, and below that, the man or microcosm, right? And the Elizabethans believed in correspondences between each and every plane individually. So a lot of connections, things like that. Oh yeah, sorry, just going back to connect. Another correspondence, again between macrocosm and microcosm, right? So universe and man would be the phases of the moon, and then madness, right? And we see this in the root word, right? So if you look at lunacy is like when you're going crazy. The root there, lun, is the same as lunar, right? So the connection between moon and madness is another microcosm, macrocosm correspondence. The last thing that Tilliard mentions besides the chain of being is the universe as a cosmic dance or harmony, where all the pieces are kind of working together to create this symphony, again, coming from God's perfect or divine order. And we have a little two-liner here from Shakespeare that Tilliard quotes. This is from one of Shakespeare's plays, and it says, "Take but degree away, untune that string, and hark, what discord follows." Right? So he's saying that if you take away the divisions or natural order that God has created, and you untune the string, or you kind of mess up creation, right? Because creation is the instrument that's creating the harmony. Then he says, and hark what discord follows, what chaos, like what lack of harmony, what that results from messing up God's divine order. So that's a good, another good example of how the Elizabethans were thinking, right? Because of course Shakespeare being during Elizabethan period as well. So he's a good person to quote for this topic. Now we're going to start on the Great Chain of Being, okay? This is where we're going to make our connection to Paradise Lost. Excuse me, I'm talking too much. Alright, So I thought Tilliard did a good job of summarizing the great chain of being on page 26 here, so I'm just going to read it out. It says, the chain, referring to the chain of being, the chain stretched from the foot of God's throne to the meanest of inanimate objects. Every speck of creation was a link in the chain, and every link except those at the two extremities was simultaneously bigger and smaller than another. There could be no gap. So the great chain of being is a ranking, basically, of everything that exists. And I'll get into the specifics in a moment, but the idea is that the things above are somehow better or more spiritual or closer to God, and the things that are lower are sort of more inanimate or further from God. And the levels that we have here, of course, being God at the top, and then we have angels, right? And then humans, animals, plants, and then inanimate matter at the bottom. Again, that's a very general scheme. Like Tilliard is saying, everything fits in there, so I didn't mention something that you're thinking of. It fits in there somewhere. That's like the general idea. And yeah, like he says, within every category there's almost infinite divisions. Now, to a modern audience, this might seem kind of, how should I say, like discouraging or rude, because everyone wants to think that everyone's equal nowadays, right? Oh, we're all equal, like there's no differences. But the Elizabethans knew that clearly was not the case. Some people are just better at certain things than others, right? There's just doesn't take a big brain to figure that out. But one thing that is interesting and a little bit more humanizing about that point of view is that this great chain allowed, it wasn't just a pure better or worse. The things that are lower on the scale are further from God, yet that doesn't mean they don't fulfill their function well, right? Because even though there are these divisions where some things are lower on the chain, there's still a sense of the universe as harmony, right? The things that are lower on the chain have to harmonize and work well with the things on the top of the chain. And so bottom of the chain doesn't necessarily mean worse. It just, they still have to work together, right? So he has a good quote about that on page 29 here, where he's talking about that everything has its place. Everything has the opportunity to excel at what it is designed to do, right? So it says, a charming attribute of the chain of being is that it allowed every class to excel in a single particular, right? Skipping ahead here. Stones may be lowly, but they exceed the class above them, plants, in strength and durability. Plants, though without sense, excel in the faculty of assimilating nourishment. The beasts are stronger than man in physical energy and desires. Man excels the angels in his power of learning, for his very imperfection calls forth that power, while the angels, as perfect beings, have already acquired all the knowledge they are capable of holding. So, even though you might be lower on the chain, you still have a part to play in that symphony for God. So that's a little bit more encouraging, I guess, even though things aren't equal. So, yeah, I talked about equality already. So one of the features of the chain that Tilliard doesn't talk as much about, but C.S. Lewis talks more about it in his book on Paradise Lost, is that one of the features of the chain is that for each individual on the ranking, their purpose or design is fulfilled when they not only fulfill their function, but also obey the people above them on the chain and rule over the people below them on the chain. And if they fail to rule over properly, then they are lazy and insolent. Insolent, is that the right word? I don't know. They're lazy and they lack initiative. They don't do the things that they're supposed to be doing. But if they don't obey the people above them, then they are rebellious, right? So you can fail on two accounts. You can fail to rule properly, and you can fail to obey properly. That is important in regards to obeying your superiors and ruling over the inferiors. So the question then becomes not whether or not people are able to rule over each other, right? Because that's kind of, with the chain, it's self-evident. That's not the question. The question is, well, is this person my natural equal? Or, sorry, natural superior. Because if someone is your natural superior, then it is right and correct that they should rule over you and you should obey them, right? So the question kind of changes a little bit. Now, this is where we sort of get into the connection between men and women, right? Because the Elizabethans imagined that men were higher on the chain of being than women were. And so it is only natural for men to be the leader or direct, women in that sense. And of course, the Elizabethans finding support for this view in the Bible. For example, we have the verse Ephesians 5:22-23, which essentially says, "Wives, submit unto your husbands as unto the Lord." The husband is the head of the wife, right? And so, in this Elizabethan world picture of the Great Chain, a spineless husband who is dominated by his wife is a disgrace because he's upsetting the order, right? Where the order is perverted, where now the wife is above the husband. So I want to talk a little bit more about the chain of being in Milton, and then we'll read some passages from Milton, which I hope you appreciate. I'll try my best to articulate them well, or give the correct cadence to the words. Specifically about Adam and Eve, and how Milton talks about Adam and Eve in terms of this hierarchy or great chain of being in Paradise Lost. So let's see here. Let's get into our first passage. So our first passage here is just about the chain of being, not about Adam and Eve. And it's when Satan is debating Abdiel in heaven. So for a bit of context, Satan at this point has heard the news about God creating the sun, which perhaps, again, heresy, but there we have it. It's in there. And God has just proclaimed that the sun will rule as God, right? With the same rights and abilities. And Satan's like, well, that's not fair. And he goes back to his kind of section or faction in heaven and is sort of convincing them that this whole situation is not fair and that they ought to make an attack against the throne and claim power for themselves. And only one person in the faction is brave enough to debate with Satan on this point. That's Abdiel. So we're here in book 5. I didn't have the line number written down. My apologies. So this is Satan speaking, I believe. Yes. He says, "Equally free, for orders and decrees jar not with liberty, but well consist." Right? He goes on to say, "Who can in reason then, or right assume, monarchy over such as live by right, his equals, if in power and splendor less, in freedom equal?" So although Satan is usurping the throne, he doesn't want everyone in his faction to be equal now, right? He still wants to have power and have like hierarchy, right? So he's trying to argue that liberty exists in when there is a hierarchy, right? Like you're truly free when you fit into your position on the chain, not when you are equal with everybody, right? So maybe he's correct on this point, but yeah. Anyways, so there's reference to the Great Chain in Paradise Lost. So now let's look at the Great Chain in regards to Adam and Eve. Okay, so our first passage here occurs in book 4, lines 288 to 299. So mid chunk of reading here. Let me just find the page. Of course, here we are. So reading from lines 288. And for context, this is just Milton as a narrator kind of describing Adam and Eve in paradise. He says of Adam and Eve, "Two of far nobler shape, erect and tall, godlike erect, with native honor clad in naked majesty, seemed lords of all, and worthy seemed, for in their looks divine the image of their glorious Maker shone. Truth, wisdom, sanctitude, severe and pure. Severe, but in the true filial freedom placed, whence true authority in men, though both not equal, as their sex not equal seemed, for contemplation he and valor formed, for softness she and sweet attractive grace, he for God only, she for God in him." So here we're seeing again the Great Chain, obviously. He says quite clearly that their sex not equal seemed, right? He was formed for contemplation and valor, whereas she was formed for softness and sweet attractive grace. He for God only, she for God in him, right? So here we see the chain where God, or man, is more directly connected to God because he's higher on the chain, whereas she is made for appreciating God in him, which then goes to God, right? Him being Adam. So next in terms of references, we have Book 8, lines 540 to 570, so even longer, 30 lines this time. Where am I here? Page 193. Oop, too far. All right, and for context on this passage, Adam is talking to the angel Raphael about the history of paradise so far, which of course is not very long. I mean, it's the beginning of the world. But Adam's talking about how he kind of notices that he's like losing his cool and like losing his reason around Eve because she's so beautiful. I'm sure all the fellas can identify with that one. Anyways, reading here from lines 540 to 570. This is Adam speaking. For well I understand, in the prime end of nature, her the inferior, in the mind and inward faculties, which most excel, in outward also her resembling less his image who made both, and less expressing the character of that dominion given or other creatures. Yet when I approach her loveliness, so absolute she seems, and in herself complete, so well to know her own, that what she wills or to do or say seems wisest, virtuousest, which is actually in there, virtuousest, discreetest, best. All higher knowledge in her presence falls degraded. Wisdom in discourse with her loses, discountenanced, and like folly shows. Authority and reason on her weight, as one intended first, not after made occasionally, and to consummate all, greatness of mind and nobleness their seat, built in her loveliest, and create an awe about her, as a guard angelic placed. To whom the angel with contracted brow, so now Raphael's responding to Adam, what he just said, and Raphael says, accuse not nature, she hath done her part, do thou but thine, and be not diffident of wisdom, she deserts thee not, if thou dismiss not her, when most thou heedest her nigh, by attributing overmuch to things less excellent, as thou thyself perceivest. For, what admirest thou, what transports thee so? An outside fair, no doubt, and well, and worthy well thy cherishing, thy honouring, and thy love, but not thy subjection. Weigh with her thyself, then value. Yeah, I think I skipped ahead to 570, so that's the end of that past section. Anyways, so just to summarize, Adam's saying, well, I know that I'm supposed to be the head of the marriage, right? I know I'm her leader, but when I am around her, reason falls short. Right? Wisdom falls short. She seems complete in herself, and whatever she says seems right. And now this is before the fall that he's noticing this, and Raphael wants to preserve God's natural order in the great chain. He rebukes him. He's like, it's no doubt that she is very beautiful, but this does not give you license to abandon reason or abandon wisdom, right? Raphael says that Eve is worth your cherishing, your honoring, and your love, but not your subjection, right? So you should do what's right, and then listen to what she has to say, not the other way around. So we have got two more here. The next one is in Book 9. This is like as the fall is happening. So Book 9, lines 816 to 825. And I didn't write down the page number. So silly. So it's going to take me a bit longer to find it here. Book 9, what did I say, 816? Here we go. And we're going till 825. 8:16. Yes, here it is. So, for context, Eve has just eaten of the fruit. Adam doesn't know yet. And she's like thinking to herself what should happen. So, that's the context. And Eve says to herself, but to Adam in what sort shall I appear? Shall I to him make known as yet my change, and give him to partake full happiness with me? Or rather not, but keep the odds of knowledge in my power, without co-partner, so to add what wants in female sex, the more to draw his love, and render me more equal, and perhaps a thing not undesirable, sometimes superior, for inferior who is free. So here we see, as she's eaten the fruit, she's fallen, and her mind she's being tempted, and she desires to usurp God's natural design, right? She wants to be his equal and perhaps even his superior, because she's thinking to herself, a lie. Well, if I'm inferior, am I truly free? Of course, again, going back to Tilliard, when you are properly in your spot in the chain, you are truly free. But now she is, and you're truly fulfilling your function. But now as she's eaten the fruit, she's thinking in sort of a convoluted or fallen way, and she wants to be Adam's equal or superior. And that seems like a good idea to her. So this last one, we have the Son of God, or Jesus, coming down to rebuke Adam for the fall and for sin. Because he also partakes after he sees Eve eat. So this is in book 10, so skipping ahead a little here, and on lines 145 to 156. So again, Jesus, or the Son of God, is rebuking Adam for eating the fruit. So Jesus says, "Was she thy God, that her thou didst obey before his voice? Or was she made thy guide, superior, or but equal, that to her thou didst resign thy manhood, and the place wherein God set thee above her, made of thee and for thee, whose perfection far excelled hers in all real dignity? Adorned was she indeed, and lovely, to attract thy love, not thy subjection, and her gifts were such as under government well seemed, unseemly to bear rule, which was thy part in person, hadst thou known thyself aright." And so, here, I mean, this is not the Bible, it's Milton writing, but we have in Paradise Lost words directly from God, that you should not have eaten. You knew that you were not supposed to do it, and yet you did it anyways. Is Eve your God? Is she your equal? Is she your superior? Why did you obey her before God, before me? Is what Jesus is saying, right? And so, again, it has similar themes of she's very beautiful. Reason may fall short, but that doesn't give you license to do the wrong thing. And so, yeah, those are, how many did we do there? 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 very clear examples of how the chain of being relates to men and women, Adam and Eve, in Paradise Lost, right? So, again, this topic might seem very off-putting to like a modern audience, but yeah, if you read older books frequently, classics, you will realize that this belief was quite orthodox and commonplace for the Elizabethans, at least before the feminist movements of like 20th century and so on. So yeah, pretty interesting. Yeah, if you are interested about Paradise Lost, you should definitely read it. It's very good. The writing is sort of unique, I guess, unless you read a lot of epic poetry, and it's not as difficult or unpenetrable as it might seem, so give it a go. Anyways, yeah, see you next time.